Okay, I'm going to start out today. First of all, thanks for coming. This is a really nice turnout, which is fantastic. We hope when you leave today you'll check out some books, please, so we can get more support and get more books in. What I'm going to do today is talk briefly about the history of comics and then how they transition into graphic novels, give you some vocabulary to work with, and show you some examples along the way. Hopefully bring these things to life for you. If there are any questions, please hold them until my section's done before we transition to Tim. And while I talk, you'll just look at me.
Intently.
And nod in agreement. Technically speaking, comic books are the direct descendant of like pictoriographic representations from cave walls, if you know anything about that. That was the sort of first combination of picture and not quite text, but they were starting to precede, right, the origination of text. And then with William Blake's poetry in the 18th century, he started to combine his picture representations with text, and that's our really first sort of grandfather of graphic novels. But between the 18th century and, of course, not until the late 19th century, there's a massive gap of picture and text combinations. So not until the late 19th century did we start to get the resurgence of that movement. But really not until the 1930s do we have any sort of firm footing for comics. In the 30s, of course, that's when we start to get these sort of serialized comics strips. Some of you have seen some of these before. Not many of you were around back then, if any. These were called continuity strips. In the sense that with each panel, and the panel looks like this. I know in the back it may be difficult to see, but you can see that there's a delineation between each of those panels, right? And in each case, what happens there in between the panels is called the gutter. And in that gutter, our brain takes over and fills in the gaps for us. And with continuity strips, that was the first time we saw a very patterned attempt to make a story out of text and visual or graphic. Okay, so that was in the 1930s. And in the 30s sort of started to build steam, and not until the 1950s do we sort of get a critical reception of comic strips. And in the 50s, this was post-World War II, and there was a reaction post-World War II to keep sort of independent thinking at a minimum. Everyone wanted to look the same, yes, and cookie cutter and things like this. And that happened with comics too. In the comic world, there was a law passed in 1954 that required comic book creators to submit their publications for review. And if they didn't meet snuff, they were told to revise and make it cleaner. This is important only because it leads to the underground movement, which is why we're here today. In 1954 was the act passed, and within 10 years, and probably 15 tops, the underground movement was in full force. And people were starting to create comic books underground and publish them on their own and disseminate them across the country. Yes, and they got a foothold that way, which is important. Without the underground movement, and really without the Censorship Act passed, we wouldn't have some of the things we do today, probably. They were forced to create new ways to publish and forced to create new ways of thinking about text and the graphic combination. Okay. Will Eisner, one of, if not the only, originator of the term graphic novel, came out of this underground movement. Will Eisner was working in the 30s and the 40s and the 50s, and then in the 70s, after the underground had gained hold, Eisner decided that he needed to find a new way to market his books. Because comics had caught on, but he wanted to sort of establish a genre that would allow him to publish a longer, more focused book, and that was what he came up with, graphic novel. Now, there's some debate whether he was the originator of that term, but that's not our purpose today. We'll just say Eisner was the guy, if that's all right. Stan Lee came out of this movement. Is anyone familiar with Stan Lee? Hands? Some of you? Okay, Stan Lee, of course, came out of this underground movement. And he's the godfather of shared universes. Shared universes are the comics that originate and try to give us a look at what it could be like for humans to interact with superhumans. So Hulk would be a representation of a shared universe. Spider-Man, right? Superhumans, heroes interacting with very common everyday folk. Stan Lee is sort of the godfather of that movement, and those caught on quickly and is still around today. And Robert Crumb and Harvey Pekar, these guys came out of that movement as well. They're significant because they started to push the boundaries of how we understood comics in general, and that is that they didn't have to be superheroes anymore. Really, the heroes that Harvey Pekar celebrates are the heroes of everyday life, the very common blue-collar worker. So there's Pekar and Crumb are very significant because they deal with the very gritty aspects of life, and really we all know what it means to toil. Most of us do, at least, right? And to try to get by, and that's what Pekar and Crumb were celebrating. That's why they're significant. So this catches us up to mid-'80s, and in the '80s, graphic novels gain a foothold, but it's not until the last few years of this decade that despite the groundbreaking work of the '90s and the '80s that graphic novels have caught on and got a critical reception. And what I mean by that is critics in the art world are starting to pay attention to graphic novels finally. Now, of course, there have been fans of graphic novels and comics for a long time, but not until the last 5 or 6 years have graphic novels gotten critical reception. And one way that I'm bringing that up today as proof, believe it or not, graphic novels have found their way into GQ. They're talking about The Watchmen. It makes sense, of course, because Watchmen, the film, just came out. But what's significant here is that this article talks primarily about the graphic novel rather than the film. So people are starting to pay attention to the actual source rather than the mutation of it. Another example would be American Born Chinese, which was a book that came out 2 years ago, a graphic novel. And it was the first graphic novel to be nominated for a National Book Critics Award. And the National Book Critics Award is the most prolifically desired literary award in our country. Everyone wants that award, and that was the first graphic novel to be nominated. So we can see that there's at least some sort of small trend in this world, in the critical world, that's paying attention to graphic novels finally. That's fantastic. Let's see, we need to understand that we owe a debt to the revisionists. I'd like to talk about the revisionists for a little bit. The revisionists are those who sought to bend and break the conventions of the comic book genre. The things that told us that we have to focus on superheroes, the things that told us we have to focus on alternative worlds. The revisionists are people like Harvey Pekar and some of the new folks today, people like Charles Burns and his Black Hole. This is primarily a surrealist graphic novel. I could flip to a number of pages and you'll see people with tails. Is that one of them? Well, difficult to see, but it gets more peculiar than that. But the revisionists believe that the conventions of the comic book genre were no longer giving us enough opportunities to explore new identities and new belief systems. They really narrowed us down into a set of parameters that didn't allow us to think outside the box. And so our revisionist patterns that are emerging in the last decade or so have really allowed us to explore different avenues. So I don't want to ignore them. I also want to show you another type of graphic novel that's coming out recently. This is Franz Kafka's The Metamorphosis. Some of you may be familiar with that short story. It's actually a novella. This is the graphic novel interpretation of Franz Kafka's Metamorphosis. So what we see here is the combination, again, of text and graphics. Have I flipped to a good page? Unfortunately for us, our author has butchered Kafka's message, which brings up another point. A lot of graphic novels are garbage. I'm not here to say today that we should celebrate all graphic novels. In fact, quite the contrary. But they are just like novels in the strictly fictional sense. There are a great deal of novels out there, romance novels, sci-fi novels, horror novels, right? We all know this. But there are very few very good ones, and it's the same in the graphic novel field. So we shouldn't distinguish graphic novels from regular fiction simply because these have pictures. They follow the same standards. There are really good writers in this world, and there are some really terrible ones. We're here today, hopefully, to celebrate nothing but the good, but approach these things with a critical eye, in other words, because a lot of them won't deliver what they say they will. In any case, that's one of the directions we're going. We have Dickens in graphic novel now. We have Shakespeare in graphic novel now. And before you dismiss it, I'd like to make one point, and that is that graphic novels are making these stories more accessible to younger generations. People who are resistant to Shakespeare, resistant to Dickens, when they see these books, they get interested. And we should not be too quick to discourage the students from doing that, or from doing our children from doing that. Because if nothing else, it gets them reading, because these books do have text, and that's a good thing. One more example is manga. Any manga fans in the house? A couple, yes.
Somebody on the fence.
Someone on the fence. So it depends, yeah. This is Scott Pilgrim. It's probably the most popular manga graphic novel hybrid in the United States today. They're making a movie about this right now, and basically when the new edition of this comes out, it's devoured by any age from 10 to 35-ish. I mean, devoured. They don't stay on the shelves. This is interesting because it combines Japanese manga with a sort of American sensibility, because our author is a hybrid identity himself. And what he's trying to do is combine the manga tradition. And the manga, of course, goes way back. Much more history behind the manga than there is with American graphic novels. And they've been serializing their books for, a couple of hundred years. And some of their books reach into the 700 and 1,000 page range, whereas most of ours are around 50 to 300-ish. In any case, Scott Pilgrim is one of the ways that an American author is trying to incorporate some of the influences from the manga tradition and make that more palatable for the masses in the United States, because some folks in the United States are resistant to things outside of it. So the graphic novel is another way that we can bridge those sort of identity gaps. Let's see, how am I doing on time? That's 15. Okay, I'd like to talk a little bit about the differences between comics and graphic novels, and what problems we might see with that. Now, we've talked about comics, and I'll give you some vocabulary with panels and gutters and things like that, but we haven't talked about the differences between comics and graphic novels and whether there is one or not. Many folks, and actually some of the artists themselves, say that there is no distinction. In fact, the graphic novel term was developed as a marketing ploy, and some point to Eisner, the man I mentioned earlier, as the originator of that ploy. And if you listen to what I said earlier, it's actually true. He was trying to find a new way to market his book. That's not to say that there isn't any credence to the term graphic novel. In fact, there's some interesting nuances if you take a look at it closely. But what's interesting is that it doesn't really matter too much whether you believe in graphic novel as a term or not. No matter what, graphic novel is a type of comic, and all comic artists will agree on that. If you want to look at graphic novel as a self-contained book that has a beginning, a middle, and end, is not serialized, that's good, that's fine. But it's still a comic and always will be. So I wouldn't get too hung up on the term graphic novel. For some folks, it just sounds pretentious, and for other folks, it sounds more legitimate. And there's nothing wrong with being more legitimate. If that gets you a different readership, it pulls in a different audience, that's a good thing, if it makes you more accessible. So I don't want to get too hung up on graphic novel versus comic, but just understand that graphic novel is not necessarily the most accurate term. Just think of these as comics. Some of them are more packaged and condensed than others. But in any case, they all share the similar theme, and that is text and visual, text and graphic. So why is that important? It's important because it combines the best of both worlds of books and film. In books, right, we have text. In film, we have visual, we have graphic, we have image. And what it does is allows us to make something beautiful of the two. Today, in today's world, at least in the United States, if not the entire world, 60 to 70% of us are visual learners. Visual learners. Graphic novels allow us a chance to explore that visual realm as well as the textual, and to learn on a different level. It provides nuances that we never understood were possible. It provides depth to stories that we would not normally have recognized. And it gives us a chance to explore a different realm of learning, which is unique today in this world. We're so conditioned to read books for a certain reason. We're so conditioned to read films for a different reason, usually passively. Graphic novels force us to consider these things in a critical way, to think about the picture and how it interacts with the text and vice versa. That's an interesting thing. Now, what I'm going to talk about for a few minutes is something quite different than what Tim will talk about. And that's intentional, because I'm trying to show you the sort of realm that I interact in and the realm that he interacts in. Just as a preface, primarily what he's going to show you are the superhero graphic novels, and the sort of alternate universe graphic novels. What I focus on in my research are the more mundane, I guess would be the word, sort of as a counterpoint. The things that exist in this world. Like, I take a look at books about cancer, and I take a look at books about the Holocaust, all the things that sort of keep us grounded in this world. Neither one is more legitimate than the other. It's just that there are quite different ways to approach the graphic novel. And I'm going to take a look at a few things for us right now. The first thing I'd like to talk about is Mouse. I'm just going to pass this around. You can just pass it if you like, but take a look if you can. Mouse was created by Art Spiegelman in 1986 and is generally considered the quintessential definitive work in the graphic novel realm. What Spiegelman did with Mouse 1 and Mouse 2 is create a graphic novel about memory and about trauma and about the Holocaust and his father's memory of the Holocaust. And then it's also a story about the making of this comic or graphic novel. It's a deeply nuanced, deeply layered text that I teach as often as I possibly can, because for me it's one of the most remarkably moving, profound experiences you will ever have with a book. What he does is create characters that are mice and characters that are cats. And the cats, of course, are trying to capture the mice and mistreat the mice. And of course, we understand that once you see the book as the conflict between the Jews and the Nazis. The reason I want to explore this a little bit is because of the significance of the graphic in this novel. As some of you know, talking about the Holocaust, talking about Nazis, talking about the Shoah, things like this are difficult to stomach. Naturally, we shall be repulsed by the event because of the large-scale massacre that took place. But we can't possibly wrap our brains around that. It's a difficult thing. And some of us don't want to even attempt to do it. What this book does is places it in an interesting place with cats and mice that isn't nearly as scary as the bodies that some of us have seen on documentaries, in picture books, isn't nearly as disturbing as some of that, and allows Spiegelman to explore this issue of memory and trauma and suffering without the blood and the gore. Now, he doesn't shy away from the blood and the gore. He talks about it, but he doesn't want us necessarily to feel that pain. So there's a sort of sanitation of the images, of the very real-world images, by putting it in the graphic realm. As you move through the book, just take a look at some of the characters. Take a look at how, in one instance, if you happen to come across it, one of the mice is smashed up against a wall by a cat and, of course, killed. It's a baby mouse. And, of course, in our brains, once we work it out, we understand that was a baby who happened to be Jewish and was brutally beaten and killed by a Nazi Nazi guard. Once that sinks in, you understand that maybe it's not a good thing for us to see that in reality. That it's a slightly easier thing, right, to see it as cats and mice. but it still makes it something that we have to consider. Makes it something that we have to at least marinate on for a little bit. Marjan Satrapi's Persepolis has just become a movie. And the movie is fantastic. Persepolis 1 and 2. The movie's fantastic, but cannot even come close to tackling the actual graphic novel and its effect. It talks about basically the struggle to survive in an Islamic state. And I won't talk too much about this one. All I want to mention is that what Mouse and what Persepolis are doing is tackling world issues for us by placing them outside of conventional text, placing them outside of film representations, and forcing us to negotiate the space between. That's a good thing for us because it lets us sit back, yes, like we would at a movie, but it also makes us focus on the text, the words, and the description, and the dialogue, so that we can sit back and actually process these things and revisit some of these panels and take a look at the gutters and consider what's happening in those gutters. Another thing I take a look at are the cancer graphic novels that have come out recently. Our Cancer Year, Cancer Vixen, Mom's Cancer, Miriam Engelberg's Cancer Made Me a Shallower Person. My research is about cancer and representations of cancer. And these graphic novels are exploring this very troubling place to be, which is someone who has cancer or a family member who's dealing with a person who has cancer. And again, the graphic allows us to see this cancer working itself out. A lot of the times, cancer experiences are sanitized in books and on film. These graphic novels, though, are doing something new. They're showing us how the cancer victim suffers, how the family deals with that pain, but also shows us how the text works with those experiences. It's impossible to describe in words how chemotherapy plays out on someone. Impossible. It may not even be possible to do with images. That's okay, but the graphic novels are getting us closer to understanding that, the very real experience of watching someone go through that chemotherapy. It's brutal. And in a book, you cannot see it. And in a film, it moves so quickly, and they have to sanitize it so much and water it down that we don't get a good representation there either. These 4 graphic novels that I've been looking at are giving us a chance to really experience, along with these family members, what it means to go through cancer. And it's not pretty, of course, but these books are trying to show us the very reality and the very truth and the very authentic moment of a cancer experience. So the graphic and the textual are interplay right here. And they're making things at least happen to us on a different level. They're forcing us to think differently because we're not used to seeing them this way. We're used to seeing just film, or we're used to seeing just text. That's the beauty of the graphic novel, at least for me. Okay, I think we'll stop there. That's about my 30 minutes. And I'd like to at least have a few questions, if you need to, before we transition into Tim. Anybody have any questions? Yeah.
Well, just probably a perspective. It seems interesting that they're originally called comics when a lot of the subject matter was far more dramatic. And I would say that that's true today as well. To look at something like Mouse and consider it a comic or derivative of comedy, if you will, is kind of far-fetched for me.
Right.
And so graphic novel seems to lend itself a little more in that direction.
Exactly, and that's the proponents of graphic novel would argue the same thing. That by placing the graphic novel label on something, they're saying that this is actually more serious, focused, and heavy, right, content than you will find in a comic. In fact, Art Spiegelman, for his Mouse comics, does not refer to them as graphic novels. He says they're comics, C-O-M-I-X. And for him, the X indicates that this is going to be a lot more serious than the comic strips you see in the newspapers. Right. Any others? Yes.
I would say, in my mind at least, that it would be more, the divisions of this area would be more along the lines of a short story versus a comic strip, a novella versus a comic book, a novel versus a graphic novel. And it's just a matter of size, as much as anything, because you can't approach anything in any particular venue.
That's exactly right too. I'm not, off the top of my head, I have no idea who said it, but one of the artists themselves said that's exactly how it plays out. Comic strips are just like short stories.
Discover Magazine now has a history of science comic strip that runs each issue. So
I think we're going to see a lot more of that.
Yeah. It's like I said, I say it's a threshold drug to get you hooked on bigger and better things.
Which is, well, that's muddy water. That's tough to get into, but you're right. That's what I was saying earlier. I mean, it gets younger folks hooked, and it actually gets some of the older folks hooked too. It's an entryway and maybe a threshold drug into exploring new things. Right, exploring new things and hopefully positive things, right, and not crack.
Some are. We've both seen them, I'm sure.
Yes.
In which case, discernment would be, this is something that could go both ways, could be misused, used for good, and used wrongly too, by the very fact that it's, the average person might still look at it as like a comic and be offended by the fact, to have a feeling that it's maybe disrespectful to a serious subject,
Right.
But
You're absolutely right, particularly with Kafka and the Metamorphosis. It was very difficult for me to wrap my head around that.
And I mean, I work at Barnes and Noble, so I'm familiar with our, that's why I came here, but I thought it'd be interesting to find out some more about this. And that I see kids, a lot of young kids in there. But I've also went through some of these, and I'm seeing this, I have parents come up and tell me, what's appropriate, and I can see a wide range of things in there, so I'd say discernment is a very useful tool. It could be good, but it could also, be misused, so.
That's true. And librarians are facing the same problem. They get some resistance from parents who are worried that their kids will pick up a graphic novel because they associate graphic novel and comics with questionable material. And part of why we want to do this today, at least I think we're all in agreement here, is that we want to dispel those myths. That not everything that comes out of a graphic novel is questionable, although there are graphic novels certainly that cross the line into some, pornographic realms, if we're being honest. But what we're celebrating today is certainly not that. We're tackling, in most cases, issues that explore identity and sexuality and economics and politics, things that make some pretty heady stuff more palatable to a lot of folks, and that's a good thing, I think. At least it gets them interested and maybe encourages them to explore elsewhere. So that's why we're here today. Hopefully to get some people excited about some of this crazy stuff, because it's crazy. It's far out. It's frickin' fun. Question in the back.
Didn't graphic novels originally go underground with most of their copies because, like you said, the whole censor thing, it was passed because comics were actually brought to trial for their content up to a certain point?
Yes, that's right. The problem, of course, is who was determining the quality or the
Wasn't it like
the consistency of that content. A lot of folks thought they knew what should be seen by the masses.
like a psychiatrist that brought all this up in court or something?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Wartime.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It was studying juvenile delinquents or something?
That's right. In fact, the first study that came out with that said that it was a very specious argument, by the way, by a thread that they could prove that comic books were leading to juvenile delinquency. And of course, that was dispelled very quickly afterwards. But it was just enough to get that act passed. Yeah, thank God it's not the 1950s. Exactly. All right, I think that's the last question. We need to get on to Tim.
Yeah.
So I'm going to pass around a few things. Yeah?
Okay. Yeah. Well, wait a minute. Yeah. I don't know when they finally got rid of that, but a lot of comic books I read over the years had Comics Code Authority, approved by the Comics Code Authority,
Right.
stamped on
You
it.
had to have that. Yeah, in order you had to. Oh, I'm sorry. You had to have that in order to publish or to sell anything in a comic store. which is why people went underground and started selling them in their little basements, on the streets and things like that. Yeah, you had to have that code of approval. The stamp of
I wanted to
approval.
pass this around first, just because this is a pretty. Here's a regular comic book, small, like this is like $3 or whatever, and but it's like takes like 15 minutes to read. Here's a this is a graphic novel. It's big. Some of them are like this, but this is Shazam or Captain Marvel. I just wanted to bring him because I figured his big head would show up on TV fairly well. I am Shazam. Anyway, if you pass that one around. The comic books I'm going to discuss, I guess, are kind of more the equivalent of the summer movie blockbuster. So I brought along some popcorn. Also for fans of our TV show Popcorn, where we discuss pop culture. And the thing you want to do when you pass this around is get your hand in there and really move the bacteria around. And later we're going to have some peanut butter and pistachio cookies. No, I'm just kidding.
Go with the pour method. Pour method.
What I'm going to kind of give you is sort of my experiences collecting comic books. So I haven't actually done formal research. I did present one paper at a pop culture conference on the Sandman once, and my thesis was that, the Sandman's a pretty good comic book. Neil Gaiman's a really great writer, except a lot of his endings just suck. And it wasn't that much more sophisticated. That's really what you want to do when a bunch of Neil Gaiman fans show up. So throw rocks at you. But I have read comic books since, probably pre-high school years, and most of mine were with the sort of mainstream superhero comic books. And when I first started collecting the term graphic novel, I only considered it to be a single, like, one-shot deal. Like there's this novel called The Futurians. I don't think there are any more made from it because it wasn't that good. But, I have to pass this one around. But it clearly says Marvel graphic novel on top of it. So that's how one way it's a graphic novel. And it costs $7, which in the 80s was like, what the hey? I'm surprised I haven't paid that much for it for a comic book. But it was bigger. It was thicker. So, but in the 80s, mid 80s, late 80s, there started to be comic books that, even though they were playing within the superhero realm and sort of still inside the box somewhat, there were some writers that kind of wanted to claw at that box a little bit and eventually maybe claw their way out of it. And you've heard of a lot of these because a lot of them have been made into movies. Most recently, we've had Watchmen, of course, by Alan Moore. And my discussion is kind of going to center on writers like Alan Moore, Frank Miller, and some of the other writers that they worked within the alternate world idea of the comic book, but they sort of pushed up against the boundaries of what had been previously acceptable. So I'm sure all these books were not approved by the Comics Code Authority because at a certain point there became a division between stuff you could buy on the rack in the grocery store or the gas station or whatever, these little racks, and you could bend the comic books back and make them less valuable that way as collectibles. But they also had what's called direct market sales to comic book shops, and those did not have to have Comics Code Authority. So you could have even superhero stories with more adult content. And if you've seen Watchmen the movie, there was an R movie and it had more adult content. And I think for a lot of people, if you're used to seeing Batman and Spider-Man movies or whatever, you might have gone to the Watchmen and gone, whoa, this is kind of different. Similarly, V for Vendetta, another Alan Moore special that, again, was probably made into somewhat more palatable, whatever. I still thought it was a decent movie, but that was Alan Moore's popular at the movies lately. This one's called The Killing Joke. It's kind of funny because it's sort of like Batman and Joker having their great big final showdown, and then after this they had like 80,000 final showdowns. So the Joker's still around, of course. But this was, again, a slightly more darker vision of the superhero. The Joker is just more psychotic than ever in this book, and but that wasn't enough apparently. So Alan Moore needed to tackle Jack the Ripper after that, and And then he wrote a phone book called From Hell, which I never made it through this. Did you read this whole thing? Was it worth it? Okay, I'll have to read it sometime. I saw the Johnny Depp movie. That was enough. I was like, I can't get through this whole thing. But anyway, Alan Moore, a big sort of, I guess you could say, in some ways, comic books gain more respectability because of the efforts of people like Alan Moore and because of people like Frank Miller. Now, what I have here is this. Now you already know we're serious because we got the leather-bound collection of a graphic novel.
And the binding.
The binding, the special binding, the little, So some of these are really kind of marketing gimmicks or whatever, or whatnot. Alan Moore said he didn't like the term graphic novel because it was just a way to sort of make the, graphic novel equals more expensive.
Alan Moore actually is the most vehement detester of graphic novel. He hates that term.
Yeah.
Alan Moore.
I was always, for some reason, I never read Mouse's statement, but the Spiegelman's statement, but I always thought, I always just called them comics, sometimes with the X or with the ICS. Anyway, so this is a collection of at least two classics. There's one called Wanted Santa Claus Dead or Alive. I don't think that really was a classic, but certainly Frank Miller's The Dark Knight Returns and Batman Year One. A lot of, amongst comic book aficionados, those are certainly regarded as classic Batman, particularly Dark Knight Returns. It's a weird dystopian futuristic tale of Batman. He's been in retirement for I don't know how many, 10 years or something, and comes out of retirement because the Joker's killing people again, and it's just it's sort of like Batman meets Dirty Harry if he was a lot older. And it's just, I remember reading this kind of going, whoa, this is hardcore here. I mean, Batman was throwing around batarangs that would they were razor tipped, so instead of just knocking you out, they would stick in your arm or stick in your chest or something. So Frank Miller envisioned this sort of what if Batman really kind of took it to the next level.
Got nasty.
And he even gets to the point where he's pursuing the Joker, where he's just flat out thinking to himself, this is it. You're going to die. I won't tell you how that ends up, but anyway, there's and Year One was then, since Frank Miller had a lot of success with that, he went and retold Batman's origin or reinvented it with Batman Year One. And I really think when you look at the recent movies, Batman Begins and The Dark Knight, that they owe a lot to these two graphic novels by Frank Miller. And Frank Miller's been popular at the movies, like I said lately. We have Sin City, of course. That one, Robert Rodriguez, the director, pretty much just said, I'm going to take your panels and just put them right on the screen. And that's what makes comic books so easy to adapt to film, because it's like, if you know anything about film, how they make it, they come up with these storyboards, and they basically draw out the whole film in comic book form on these big boards. I'm like, well, here it is already. We don't even need those boards. Let's just flip page 3. Let's do that. So with Sin City, Miller kind of moved away from working for the man at DC and did it sort of a creator-owned thing. He totally created his own universe of Sin City, and it's more crime noir kind of series of books. And one I forgot to mention, this is Miller's an earlier effort called Ronin, and I guess I brought it up last because I don't really think it's his best, but it is regarded amongst some people who it's just kind of weird. It's like this Japanese guy from, I don't know, the 13th century. His spirit is stuck in some guy in the future, and it was a little too odd for me. But again, probably got his career off to a good start. Huh? Pacino.
Was that in the movie Ronin? Was that Pacino?
No.
Oh, what was that?
That movie had nothing to do with that comic book. It's a different. The movie Ronin has nothing. Oh, and this is 300. Everybody. now you're looking at a graphic novel here. I mean, this we're hardcover, thicker, and it's totally different shape. If you're storing comic books, this is a nightmare because this does not fit in anything. It does not go in your cardboard boxes that all your other comic books go in. So, but again, that one just looks like a movie screen, so it's ready to go. It was easy to make into a movie, obviously.
And if you've seen 300, you'll see.
Yeah, again, they go right to the. Yeah, Zack Snyder, I guess, directed 300, and he directed Watchmen, and he's apparently a real comic book geek, and he was totally faithful to both those books. So that's Miller and Moore. Those are kind of the giants in the, again, mainstream comics in the 80s, of those who attained some critical recognition. In the 90s, some that kind of followed in their wake were Neil Gaiman, the Sandman, and he does write good stuff. Every time he would come to the end of a story arc, I just felt like he got tired and kind of, or maybe it was postmodern, I don't know. But he wrote a series called The Sandman that I think lasted 75 issues, which is unusual in mainstream comics for any writer or artist to stick around for more than 20-ish. 20 issues would be a great run for a writer or artist. For somebody to write something and 75 issues later to still be writing it, and then to finish it and to have nobody follow that with anything else, to say this is the end, even though it's profitable, this is stopping. I don't know how he got him to do that. But once he finished the story, that was it. So, but there's, I don't know, something like 7 or 8 volumes of The Sandman. I guess they've collected that into one gigantic it's bigger than the phone book. So that would be hard to read, though. I mean, it'd be like, knock yourself out if you fall asleep or something. But the Sandman, the interesting thing about that is that he took the DC universe, and within that he still created his own thing, his own mythology. So superheroes still exist in the world, Batman, Superman, all that. But then he had this other mythology of godlike characters that were representations of certain aspects of humanity. So the title character, the Sandman, his name is Dream, and he's got something like 6 brothers and sisters: desire, destiny, death, despair, destruction. A lot of them don't sound that positive. But anyway, I really think if you're interested in kind of fantasy type books, you really should check. And if you're interested in reading comic books, really check out The Sandman, because that's certainly one of the, I would call that the, as far as fantasy goes in comic books, the comic book epic of, that's been done so far. Something maybe a close second or distant third, I don't know, would be Preacher by Garth Ennis. Garth Ennis is another 90s type, somebody who really got going in the 90s, and he's still doing a lot of comic books today. He reinvented the Punisher a few years back, and probably is responsible for the, somebody wanted to make a movie of it recently, but they made a crappy movie. It's too bad. But I haven't seen a movie of Preacher yet. I've heard it discussed, but I'll pass this around. This is one that you might not want to let the kids flip through, because there's Ennis got in. He wasn't quite as serious as some of the others. He really wanted to play with, really have black humor. In fact, I remember he ended one of his letter columns by saying, "I hope you like your humor black," because he really has there's a lot of graphic violence and just bizarre situations. In this story, Preacher, he's got a fallen preacher who somehow gets the power to tell people to do stuff. Whatever he tells you to do, you'll do it no matter what he tells you. And he tells people to do some pretty bizarre things. And then there's like angels, there's a vampire in there. So really weird mix of fantasy, but yet there's still some realism in it as well, and a lot of black humor.
Yeah, don't let the kids see this.
Ennis also had a good run on Hellblazer. If any of you saw the Constantine movie, for some reason they wouldn't call it Hellblazer, but that's, John Constantine is the title character, is the character in Hellblazer. He is the Hellblazer. And again, Ennis just took a character that Alan Moore had actually created, but I think Ennis did the most with it. We're back to Batman again. For some reason, when I was looking at serious superhero type graphic novels, it seems like a lot of them revolve around Batman. I don't know why. Maybe it's because he's dark already and we can do something with that. But this is Arkham Asylum. If you know anything about the Batman mythology or whatever, all the crooks, the superhero bad guys or whatever, or supervillain bad guys, they can't just be kept in a normal prison, so they're kept in a place called Arkham, where they can contain the criminally insane with superpowers. And this is all about the somebody like Arkham, just like the inmates starting to run the asylum. And this was like one of the few comics I read that kind of creeped me out a bit. So Yeah, it's got something going on if it could creep me out. And along with that, here's another Batman one that just came out recently. This one's called Joker, and just got Joker's big lips on the cover. I think they were a little bit inspired by the Heath Ledger Joker, and that the weird thing about that one's like Batman doesn't show up until the last 2 pages. If you want to read the Batman story, that ain't it. They're really focusing on Joker. I also thought I would mention some of the straight up superhero stories. A lot of these have been superhero stories, but really, when you're talking about superheroes, a lot of times they're wearing very colorful underwear. I don't know why they feel the need to do that, but that's what I see as the hallmark of the really bright colors in superhero comics. So we have Crisis on Infinite Earths. And the weird thing is, I think they tried to draw like every single character in the DC universe. They're all like really tiny. If you ever come to my office, I have a big poster of this. And it was a pretty good, I think it was 12 issues. And they killed off some characters. That was cool. They were like, the whole DC universe is threatened. Unfortunately, since then, there's been like 10 million more crises that have faced the DC universe. They actually had one recently called Final Crisis. I'm like, I hope you mean it. You better be serious. I am not reading this crap anymore. But no, the original Crisis on Infinite Earths was great. They actually made me cry that Supergirl got killed. I'm like, who cares about Supergirl? You were mentioned earlier the Marvel. One thing that's I talked about a lot of DC comics here, and for some reason DC has the big names. Has had a lot of the big books over the years. This is called Marvels, and so Marvel said we can do serious superhero stuff too, and they got, I think this is by Kurt Busiek. Marvel always has been more of a they've tried to make heroes that had a little bit more of the real world aspect to him. Like Spider-Man supposedly is probably the #1 favorite superhero because he has real world problems. He's got to pay the rent. He's got an aunt that he's looking after. He's got a girl. You just don't think with Batman. It's like, nope, he's focused on kicking the bad guys' butts. I remember Michael Keaton said something like, yeah, when I read about the character, I totally got it. Rich guy dresses up in his underwear and beats the crap out of bad guys. So with Marvels, though, that sort of mix of the supernatural and the common is taken to an interesting new level in that the main character of this book is a newspaper photographer. And so it sort of chronicles the development of the Marvel Universe, like the first appearance of Spider-Man, the first appearance of Fantastic Four, and we see these stories again through the eyes of just some average Joe who's trying to snap pictures of these new Marvels that are appearing on the world stage. So that was a fairly well-written series. And the other thing to note here is that what I like to say about comic books, you're right that there are a lot of bad graphic novels, just as like there's a lot of bad novels, but at least with comic books you get some pretty pictures to look at. That's and no more prettier than in Marvels. He actually painted. He didn't just draw and then have somebody. He painted these, and he got models. I mean, he shows you in the back. He's like, here's pictures of people I had at home, like doing a superhero pose, and then I would go and paint this. So that's Alex Ross, and so I think this Marvels has come to be known more for the real impact. Or the sort of debut of Alex Ross. It still comes down to Captain Marvel and Superman duking it out at the end, doesn't it? I'm like, that's what comic books are. I remember reading Alan Moore's epic run on Swamp Thing, and it ended with like the forces of evil and good were like two giant hands, and they shook hands at the end instead of fighting. I'm like, that's not a comic book. They got to beat the crap out of each other. So with Kingdom Come, it sort of takes the whole Dark Knight idea and takes the entire DC universe and looks sort of like 50 years into the future and sees all these characters, how they've aged, what's developed. And again, of course, there has to be some ultimate threat to the world and conflict. So there's that. Recent one, Identity Crisis. This is sort of the comic superhero book as murder mystery. It received a lot of attention. It was okay, but like I thought it was pretty good. But when you got to the end, it was kind of like a lot of murder mysteries. Like, oh, the person did it who appeared for like 2 minutes in the story. You're like, yeah, okay, big deal. And finally, I brought this one just because it's weird, and I thought I'd have you look at this. Apparently, we can do superhero stories with mice now. So not just Holocaust stories, but this is called Mouse Guard, and it's like mice. It's like Lord of the Rings with mice. That's what I call it. And yeah, they're going through. They're fighting. I don't see any cats so far. They're fighting owls. They're fighting snakes or whatever. I felt a little silly reading this one, but the art is pretty sweet looking.
I will mention, though, I've never seen this until just now, but it did win an Eisner Award. I didn't mention that earlier, but the Eisner Award, of course, is the foremost award you can win in the graphic novel comics section, based on Will Eisner, of course, grandfather. So it must be somewhat legit.
Yeah, I think the art carried that one through. But
here's some mice.
At any rate, that's like I said, that's mostly been my experience with graphic novels over the years. A lot of graphic novels, again, it started out for me as seeing things that were just self-contained, one-shot deals. But a lot of the things I've passed around or talked about today, in fact, they were published individually, one issue a month for, say, 12 months. So that's how long Watchmen took like a year to finally come out. And then later somebody collected it all into one edition and called that, those started they were referred to as graphic novels as well. And when you go to the comic book shop nowadays, it's like, hey, here's your big wall of graphic novels. There's a ton of them. So anything that gets any renown or success at all, like say 5 issues, 6 issues, whatever, it will be collected. And you see how that's a beautiful marketing thing. Suckers like me pay for it twice.
I want the thing all together.
Because they don't want to damage the original. This thing might be worth something. The collected edition probably is not going to be, unless we get to the point someday where somehow collected editions are worth something.
When books are no more.
When paper is just gone from the earth. Then these note cards will be valuable. But so I find it also helpful that if you've stacked all these things up in boxes, you don't want to go track all those down. Like, where was issue 12? So you buy the collected thing just to have something easy to refer back to, without having, hey, there it is on my shelf. So anyway, that's what I have on superhero and fantasy comics. If you have any questions, I'll entertain those. Go ahead.
Just wanted to mention, I finished reading Arkham Asylum. And in the back, they have the screenplay, if you will, the actual text of the dialogue in the back. And then you can see the metamorphosis from screenplay to the comic book.
Yeah.
But the question I want to ask kind of both of you is, how important do you feel the synergy is between the artist and the writer? I noticed some are in black and white, some lend themselves more to color. How important do you think that partnership is?
Well, I suppose my guess would sometimes they let you in on that, and sometimes they talk about their relationship with artists and writers, talk about how they work together. But I imagine it must be really varied. Like in some cases, it must just be like they never meet. They mail each other. The writer mails the pages, the artist cranks it out, and they don't really talk. In other cases, I'm sure I know like between Neil Gaiman's worked with Dave McKean over years, and they've collaborated a lot. I'm sure they've socialized a lot. So I'm sure some of those friendships are formed, and that influences it. But
I'd add to that. I would say the more successful graphic novels and comics rely on a very close relationship. Alan Moore used his guy for years and years.
Mm-hmm.
Scott Pilgrim, Bryan Vaughn, which is the author of The Last Man, Why the Last Man, which is a 9-volume set already. He's been working with the same folks forever. I think the tightest bonds are the ones who succeed. At least I don't think that's a coincidence.
Yeah.
I mean, you can see it. They work very intimately together, and they know each other not just professionally but socially, and hang out.
Sometimes that's possible. Sometimes they probably live like a couple states apart or something.
Or countries.
Countries, yeah. So.
Is there more percentage of writers that have an artist they work with, or is there more that just do their own art?
You mean like Frank Miller writing and drawing occasionally? I don't have any idea.
There has to be more writers that just write. It's sort of like the whole thing of like how many actor directors are out there. There's not too many, but there is a significant percentage that they get well known. And yeah, that's an interesting thing too. I brought one by John Byrne. I don't think I passed it around, but sometimes you see that. You see somebody who, there's no chance of any other artist screwing this up. My vision is going to be realized exactly how I want it to be. So there are writer artists.
And then there are guys like Harvey Picar who has the vision but can't draw for a lick. So he's got to hire other folks to do it.
Yeah.
Is there, I grew up like the 60s and 70s reading songs back then. They were a lot lighter, the superheroes, pretty clean, it was a good escapism, but it seems like what I'm seeing now in the graphics is a lot darker. Is there anyone out there writing a lighter fare? Or do you go back to the nostalgia kind of graphics? Yeah.
That one is.
No, what's interesting about that is that's actually got the cover on the front instead of the back like most manga does.
Oh, right. That's right. But yeah, that one's exploring a very light
So that's more the lighter
story
than
arc
manga.
of this. Yeah.
He fights a lot of villains and does crazy things with weapons and flies through the air. But you're not supposed to take it seriously.
Sometimes real life is a little too dark already, and it's nice to go back.
Yeah, exactly.
Outside of that, though, I rely on him.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I mean, because I try to avoid those. They're not dark. I'm reading about the zombie apocalypse here with the Walking Dead. They kill people left and right in that book. Don't get attached to any of the characters. I'm halfway convinced the main guy's gonna die. He's already had his hand chopped off.
He won't die.
But his wife died. Anyway, I do think it's hard to say because I do read some superhero comics still, like. Straight up like Batman. Occasionally I'll pick up one of those. Compared to the past, they've got to be a lot darker. But compared to what you see in, say, a PG-13, I'd say it's most of them are fairly comparable to that. I've heard that the guy who writes The Walking Dead was asked by that company he works for, Image, to create a more upbeat, sort of not dark comic book. So he's got a series called Invincible, which I hear is good. He's a good writer, so you might want to check that out if you're looking for something like that. And Mouse Guard is certainly a nice, I think, tale for children. I mean, I was bored with it, but it's interesting. Good art, really good art. So. Anything else?
Well, thanks for coming out, guys. Please check out some books.